Hey everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome to a bit of a preview of a series to come later. I'm working on a many months long series for my other podcast, Every Version Ever, on versions of Cinderella, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty. These are all characters we've obviously covered in the past, but there are more versions to come, from Disney live-action remakes to obscure animation like the Filmation ripoff of Disney's Snow White. There's going to be a bunch of episodes coming your way in the coming months, but today's episode I actually recorded a year ago, before the plans had fully formed for what would become the series for Every Version Ever. At the time I was just going to continue my Cinderella series, and Eli Sanza joined me to talk about every early animated version of Cinderella that we could find to watch online. And just in case anyone wants to watch these for themselves, I've collected as many links as I can and put them in the description. Whatever is still available online at the time I upload this will be there. We started with the very earliest animated versions from animators such as Lotte, Reiniger, and Walt Disney, and covered shorts featuring beloved characters like Betty Boop and Popeye, and some more obscure ones like Mutt and Jeff and maybe Julius the Cat. The jury's still out on that one. There will be more Princess episodes later in the year. I've got a couple other miniseries in the works first, including one on Pixar's Spark Shorts coming soon. But we'll be back with more Cinderella as well as Sleeping Beauty and Snow White soon. For now, we'll kick things off with the very first animated version of Cinderella ever, and one of the earliest animated shorts of all, the 1922 silhouette animated stop-motion short from one of the pioneers of animation herself, Lotte Reiniger. So I know you've seen a lot of classic cartoons. Had you seen any of these?
Yeah, I've seen some of these. I haven't seen a lot of them actually though, because some of these series I'm not as well versed in as others. Like MGM, Warner Brothers, and Disney are the ones I'm most familiar with. Terry Toons and Lotte Reiniger and stuff like that. These are shorts that I haven't seen in a long time or I'm just now finding out about.
Yeah, most of these I had not seen. Some of them I had heard about, but just had never gotten around to watching them.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with Lotte Reiniger's Cinderella. This was the very first animated adaptation. I had heard of her. She was the one who made, not the very first, but the oldest surviving feature-length animated film.
Yes, that's right. She made the earliest surviving animated feature film in history.
Yeah, I'm not sure who did the other ones, but they don't exist anymore, so
yeah,
no way to watch them.
Yeah, there's no way to watch them. Like I heard of those ones, and the name of the director escapes me. I think it was like an Argentina stop motion film or something like that. But yeah, it does not survive anymore.
Well, this one, when I first started reading up on different versions of early animated Cinderellas, this one I kept reading was the one that was based on the original Grimm story. So when I started watching it, that's what I went in thinking. And like some things were happening, and I was thinking, you know what? I should probably read the original Grimm story so I have some context as to what's going on. Because like I vaguely remember reading the Grimm's Cinderella probably when I was a kid, but I didn't really remember anything that had happened, and I didn't remember what was going on with the lentils, because this is one of those silent films. Like I've seen a bunch of silent versions of things, and it usually ends up like they expect you to be familiar with the story, so they don't really explain a lot. And this seemed to be that. Like they explained enough that you sort of got the gist of what was happening, but like with the thing in with the lentils, I was like, you know what, I should just read the original Grimm story just to refamiliarize myself with it. So I read the original story, and the more I got into this short, the more I realized I think she kind of mashed up a bunch of different versions, because in some ways it was like the Grimm's fairy tale, but there was also a lot of elements from the Charles Perrault version, because like everybody knows that the original Grimm tale had the grim ending with the stepsisters cutting off parts of their feet and getting their eyes pecked out by birds, which this had some of that, but there was a bunch of elements in this from the Perrault version. The main difference that I could tell with the Grimm's version that I don't think really survives to any other version is that there's not just a ball. There's like at least a 3-day festival that Cinderella is wanting to attend. The ball was from the Perrault version, and the ball is what happens in this one.
Right. Well, I haven't read any of the original versions of Cinderella before, so I have no like baseline understanding of what this is originally supposed to be like and in either version.
Hmm.
So, but it is interesting that you say that it seems to you that she combined the both versions.
Yeah, I think and there's like so many versions of Cinderella, so I'm not sure if, because there was a few things that I noticed that I don't think were from either the Charles Perrault version or the Grimm's version, and I didn't have a copy of the Perrault version on hand to reference while I was watching these, so I'd need to look it up and reread that one too. But I specifically looked up the Grimm's version because everything that I was reading online said this one was based on the Grimm's version. And it is because there's a lot of stuff in this that is only in the Grimm's version, like the tree growing on her mother's grave and the birds coming out of the tree to give her things. There's no fairy godmother in the Grimm's version.
Mm.
And another thing that made me notice that this is not the Grimm's version is her father, as far as I could tell, is not in this short. In the Grimm's version, he's alive. Like it's only her mother that died in the Grimm's fairy tale. And also her stepsisters in this are ugly. In the Grimm's fairy tale, they are described as beautiful and fair of face, but vile and black of heart.
Oh wow.
So I think when Charlotte Lotte Reiniger made this, I think she kind of just picked and chose various elements of the versions that she wanted to use.
Okay, well, you know what? Like, I'm not like a big like reader of like the Grimm's fairy tales, so I haven't read a lot of them, but I've heard about their style. And when I watched this, I had a feeling that some of this was based on the Grimm's fairy tale
Hmm.
version because when they got to the part when they like literally cut their feet, like
Yeah,
I was thinking, oh, this has Grimm written all over it. So
yeah.
I kind of just assumed this was based on the Grimm's fairy tale.
Yeah, definitely. That part is definitely from the Grimm's fairy tale. I think all of the dark parts of this are based on the Grimm's fairy tale. I think she probably chose to combine elements because if you're going for a straight adaptation of the Grimm's, it's going to be longer. And this is already a short. This is already very truncated from either version. And it really is just a shadow play because there is some words, but it is a silent film. And the Grimm's version had a lot more stuff happening,
Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting because there was so much in there that I was reading. I was like, oh, wow, I don't remember this. I've never seen this adapted in any version. It'll be interesting as I get into more versions of Cinderella to see if there's any that actually follow the Grimm story because in some ways, like normally I don't like gory things, I don't like dark things,
Mhm.
but in some ways I kind of liked the Grimm's story better than the Perrault version because I think the people in it are less dumb.
Ah,
Like because with the prince, like the whole thing with him like finding the person who's the slipper fits, it doesn't make him seem like the brightest bulb.
yeah.
But in the Grimm's version, because it is not a ball, it is a festival, she goes on multiple days. She always has a different costume, but she goes on multiple days, and the prince is just fascinated with her. He doesn't know who she is, and she won't tell him who she is. And she wants to leave on the first. There's no time limit either. Like that's one of the big things everybody knows about Cinderella. There's no time limit in the Grimm's version. She just wants to leave at the end of the night. And the prince wants to go with her so he can see where she lives, and she won't let him. She escapes. So after that happens a couple of times, he spreads tar on the steps outside so that she will get stuck and can't leave, but she does get free, but leaves a shoe behind.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So it's not like she just accidentally stepped out of her shoe and fled. She was trying to get away so he couldn't see where she lived and ended up leaving a shoe because of the trap he laid. And he also has a vague idea of where she lives too. The thing with the shoe, like trying it on different feet, at least in this version, I don't think he's aiming that at the entire kingdom. Like whoever the shoe fits will be my bride. He knows roughly where she lives. So it's basically he's just trying it on members of her family to see who it fits because she's been in disguise this whole time and he doesn't really know exactly what she looks like.
Oh my God.
So he's a lot smarter in the Grimm's version than we're used
Right.
to.
Oh my God. It sounds like almost like they dumbed down this version in a way.
Kind of, yeah.
By the way, no fairy godmother, no midnight time limit. Is there even any like fantasy in this version?
It's sort of. The she in the story, her father is going on a trip and he asks her what she wants. This reminded me of Beauty and the Beast, like the original fairy tale Beauty and the Beast. But he asks her what she wants, and she says, "Just bring me the first branch that brushes your hat." So he does that, and she plants this branch over her mother's grave, and it grows into a big tree. It's not specifically stated, but most interpretations think that this is supposed to be her mother, like reaching out to her from beyond the grave. And then there are birds that nest in this tree that bring her things. Like she goes out to the tree, wishes, and then the birds come and drop what she needs. So there's fantasy in that, but there's not like someone waving a magic wand and making magical things happen. It's things happen that don't really get explained that are kind of fantastical, but they're a lot closer to reality than a fairy godmother waving her wand.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah.
And I did not know that it was like I did not know that the Cinderella was originally like it didn't have like a outward like magic in the fantasy. It was like it was sort of like more of like a subtle, like
Hmm.
grounded type of fantasy.
Yeah. Well, the basic story of Cinderella has basically been told for centuries. So the story has evolved based on whichever culture has taken, like, no one knows where the story originated because it's that old. But every culture has put their own spin on it. So I believe that the Perrault version is like the basic French version now, and the Grimm's is the German. But there's so many other versions, a lot of which don't even name her Cinderella. That's kind of a newer, like from a few hundred years ago, but newer in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
Development that her name is Cinderella.
I see. You know, it's interesting that you say that Lotte Reiniger sort of like truncated this into like a short film, even though the story was kind of like detailed and long originally.
Hmm.
And that's kind of one of the things I like about her because she is you could see this when you watch The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. She's really good at directing silent films and telling stories without dialogue and still making them understandable and making the characters expressive even though they don't speak.
Hmm.
And I think she's a really good animation director. And that was something I liked about this too.
Yeah, that's one that I have not seen yet. It's one I've been meaning to watch. I think it's partly based on 1001 Arabian Nights.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about doing that whenever I get to Aladdin and doing like a series on 1001 Arabian Nights, because that would kind of fit in with that. Because that's one of those movies that I feel like you have to watch as an animation fan, and I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's like I feel like even if you like aren't like interested in like animation history and like it's just like a good film, a surprisingly good film because you would think that like, you know, most fantasy films from the 1920s are like not great at like reeling you in because you know because
Hmm.
the technology at the time is so noticeably like dated
Yeah.
but like with an animated fantasy it's like
Hmm.
one of the best of the decade just because the animation alone like it's like even though it's not as realistic as live action it's better at reeling you in because it's like so much more it's Lotte Reiniger's like soul is like in
Hmm.
that film. Like she like does such a good job of like really detail of all the details and all the animation and all the art to making it like something really great and grand and presentable. It's like it and yeah, it's like it's actually like a really like I think it's like a masterpiece.
Yeah, I definitely need to watch that one. One thing that, well, we should probably talk too. Like, there's not very much words in here, so there's not a ton of dialogue. But I kept seeing people talk about a line in here where Cinderella's stepfamily calls her a slut.
Yeah.
And that does happen. But I had a question as to like why. Is that one of those words that has changed meaning? So I had to look up the etymology, and it definitely has changed meaning, and it has changed meaning recently. Like up until the 1960s, the basic use of the word just meant someone who was dirty.
Oh my God.
And it was usually used for women and usually used as like a maid, like a scullery maid or something. But it could be used for men or boys too. But it basically just meant someone who was untidy. And it wasn't until the 60s when it took on the meaning that we know it as today.
Okay, see that is really interesting because I had a feeling when I saw the word in this film that okay, there must be something some other definition to this word, like which I'm sort of used to this because you know this happens a lot with English
Yeah.
languages over like time. That's like I wasn't even surprised. Like I just assumed, okay, well this is not obviously this isn't what the modern context of that word is not. It does not apply to whatever this is. I never like I was so into the story though. I never stopped to think, oh, what does it mean? But that makes total sense.
Hmm. Yeah. No, a lot of times when I see something like that, especially watching a lot of older things, you'll run into things. Like that happened a few times with doing Peter Pan. I kept seeing words that was like, I feel like that must have changed meaning at some
Yeah.
point. But this one surprised me with how recently the meaning had changed because it seems like one of those words that people would have been just using for centuries.
Hmm.
And like the things that I read say it is possible that it had a more modern connotation to it, but for the vast majority of uses, it meant someone who was dirty, usually a maid.
Right.
Like it was used as a derogatory way to look down on a servant.
All right.
I just thought it was really fascinating that it was in the mid 1960s where
Yeah.
it just fully changed and the original meaning was basically lost.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah, that is very surprisingly recent.
So, was there anything about this version that really stood out to you in terms of the animation?
Just that it was just really creative and expressive, and I liked the art style, just like I usually do with all of her films. Like it was like one of the better like retellings of the story of all the shorts I watched actually.
Yeah, it was. It I didn't really like in doing the research for this episode. I mean, I knew that a lot of them were just going to be really cartoony, but I didn't really expect them to, well, for a lot of them, just basically not be an adaptation of Cinderella. They basically took elements of the Cinderella story and did their own thing with it.
Yeah.
I feel like of all the ones that we're going to be talking about, this is the most faithful to the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. When we talk about the other ones, that'll be very clear.
Yeah. But this probably is my favorite of all the ones we talked about. It's not the one that would necessarily like for most of these, they're just funny. So this one is
Mhm.
not my favorite in terms of how much it made me laugh. But as far as just like basic artistry, this one is the best. The what she was able to do with paper cutouts, it was amazing. It's basically a stop motion film with paper.
That's right. Oh, and I feel similarly to you. Yeah, this one is like, if not my favorite, it's probably like the most like well made, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, this is definitely the most well made, especially I'm not sure how much of a team she had. So I kind of think that most of this was done by her by herself.
Yeah, I think most of it was like I read about like the work she did on the feature film she made, like, and she did a lot of that herself. She had some assistance, I think just for practicality reasons, just to get the film finished on time. But
Hmm.
I know that she was like, well, she was the director, and like a lot of times, animation directors do a lot of, especially in the old days, they did a lot of stuff, themselves. Like the
Yeah.
independent stuff, they did a lot of that themselves.
Yeah. And with something like this, I can't really blame her for wanting to do it herself. Like, especially because like animation was basically a new art form. It's not like people were just popping up studios everywhere. And she was in Germany. I'm not sure if she was in Germany at this exact time, but she was somewhere over there.
Yeah,
So it's unlikely that there would have been people who would have even been able to help her.
yeah, I think that, yeah. It was the same thing with Winsor McKay actually, because I think Winsor McKay animated Gertie the dinosaur single-handedly. I think he had an assistant help him with the backgrounds, but all the stuff with the dinosaur and the animals, well, I think that was all him.
Hmm. Plus, I feel like for something like this, it's a little bit easier to do it by yourself because it's not like she needs to make a new drawing for each frame. She just needs to reposition her cutouts.
Yeah,
So obviously, it's going to take a long time either way. But since she basically has to build paper puppets, once she's got that, it's just a matter of getting all of her frames photographed.
yeah, yeah. It is a lot faster to do it this way. I'm not surprised that she was like able to like master this so well.
Hmm. One other story thing before we move on to the next version. There was a scene at the end that is one of those things where I don't know if this came from another version or not. Or, I mean, it's also possible that I don't have a perfect translation for my copy of the Grimm's fairy tales. But it looks like the stepmother explodes at the end of this. But that is not in at least my copy of the story. So I'm not sure if that was taken from a different version that I've just never heard of or not.
I have no idea. It's like I did just accept that
Yeah.
totally when it happened. Though I was just like, yeah, oh sure, okay, let's. I did not expect that, but I'm with you. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least in my copy, after the prince discovers Cinderella, it's basically says that she and the sisters go white with rage, but then she's not mentioned again. The sisters go to their wedding afterwards, and that's where they get their eyes pecked out. But the stepmother wasn't there for that. So I'm not sure
Right.
what is supposed to have happened to her in the original story.
Yeah. Well, for the Lotte Reiniger version, like I also thought that maybe that part when she like kind of exploded, I thought maybe that was like supposed to be like not a literal explosion, but like a
Oh, I
sort of like
suppose
an abstract mental like
a
depiction
metaphorical
of her
explosion.
a metaphor, inner turmoil, or something like that. And maybe she was just being really artsy about it.
It could have been. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, that one was probably my favorite.
Mm.
The rest, I'm not going to say like it's all downhill from here, but
Yeah.
in terms of artistry, this one was the best.
Yeah, this is up there. This is a really like a high bar.
Yeah. In contrast, we have another one done the same year from Walt Disney,
Yeah.
which I didn't realize that he had done a Cinderella story before his 1950 film.
Oh yeah.
That surprised me.
Yeah. Like yeah, this is something that I've known about for a long time because you're like, have you ever heard of like the laugh-o-grams before?
I'd heard of the Laugh-O-Grams. I don't know how many of them I've actually watched, but I didn't realize that he had done a Cinderella story in his Laugh-O-Grams series.
Yeah. Well, that was sort of like a fairy tale like oriented series for a while. So yeah, they did Jack and the Beanstalk, Puss in Boots, I think Little Red Riding Hood and the Three Bears too. So yeah, this like, I think this might be like the only other version before the 1950 Cinderella that Disney made.
Hmm. Well, this also featured a pre-Alice comedy's Julius the Cat.
Oh yeah, I saw. Yeah,
So that also surprised me. I was like, wait a minute, that's the character from the Alice comedies. I didn't realize he'd had an origin. I mean, I guess maybe I did know that he came before the Alice series, but I didn't. I wasn't expecting him to show up in this.
yeah. I don't know. To be fair, it might just be like a prototype Julius. Maybe they didn't name him yet or anything like that. But like look,
It
if you
said
watch it out,
Julius at the beginning. It called him Julius.
did they call him Julius? Oh, I missed that. Did they?
Yeah,
Oh, that's interesting. I thought Julius first appeared in the Alice comedy.
I think it said Julius.
Oh God, no, that is interesting. I missed that because I just assumed in my mind, okay, well, there's a cat that looks like Julius, but it's not. There's no way that it's actually Julius because he appeared in the Alice comedies like in like 1926 or something like that. But I missed the part where apparently his name appeared.
Well, I just opened it up. I guess I'm not 100% sure. They could have added this title card later. So the title card says Julius the Cat in Cinderella.
Oh, okay,
So, and now that I'm looking at it, this title card looks newer than the animation. So
okay. So
maybe this was added later.
maybe it was added later. Okay, yeah. There's no way to know, I guess. Like
Yeah, I don't know. But the version I watched said Julius, but it is possible that someone added that at a later date and just saw
it
this
does
cat
look
that looked like Julius and thought, well, that's Julius.
a lot like it does look a lot like Julius. Yeah, I'll give
Yeah.
you that.
But this one is a much different style to the Lotte Reiniger version. This is in
Completely.
the classic early black and white animation era style. It's not quite rubber hose, but it's not realistic at all.
Yeah, it's not. It's like it's very much like a lot of animation in the early 1920s looked like this. It was very crude, very like
Mhm.
serviceable animation style. They a lot of times they cared more about like how well can we adapt the look and feel of this comic book into like an animated adaptation because they did that. They did those comic adaptations a lot, and that was all they mostly cared about. It was like it took a few more years before the actual quality of the animation like evolved into something that was more appealing and smoother. But this
Mhm.
is very common type of animated film.
Yeah. And it also had that common for the time thing where things just kind of happen and then they happen again and again and before you go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Like, because they use a lot of animation loops.
Yes. Oh, that was common too. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it really seemed like they were padding for time because you have, after you get the brief introduction to Cinderella and Julius washing dishes, and I should note also, Cinderella looks like she's like 10 years old here.
Yeah.
So it, I didn't know where they were going with that. And then you have this prince who I later realized, oh, I guess he's supposed to be a child too. You don't really get that with this first scene because you have a prince who is a wonderful fellow, they say.
Yeah.
And he's riding a horse chasing a bear. It's just like repeatedly shooting it in the butt. It's like a long chase sequence of this bear leading to a family of dancing bears. And they all go into this cave, and there's this huge off screen fight that lasts a long time. And then this prince emerges victorious somehow, apparently having single handedly slaughtered this entire family of bears
Yeah.
without a scratch. He's fine.
Yeah. Of
And
course he is.
when he came out with all the dead bears, I was like, the standards for what makes someone wonderful seem to have changed from 1922.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that's like characters like this were like the villain in Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, yeah,
This is Gaston. Like times have really changed.
yeah. Because this wasn't like he was hunting a bear for food or hunting a bear that attacked someone. He just slaughtered this whole family of seemingly fun-loving, silly dancing bears.
Yeah, I know. It was like having the teddy bears picnic out there, and all of a sudden, he just like rained down his wrath upon them. I was like, that was sad.
And then you get a scene of him going back to the castle, and there's a an invitation shown of a ball being held on Friday the 13th for some reason.
Yeah, that was weird.
And the prince also has a little pet dog who has a bottomless bag like Mary Poppins that he makes be the mailman. the,
Mm.
I don't know what was up with this dog because the dog rides out to deliver all these messages and he crashes, and a passerby asks if he's hurt, and the dog bashes him over the head with a crutch. Like the, the prince and his entourage are very violent people.
Yeah, I got the feeling when the dog hit him, he was like, he was in a bad mood because he just got hurt and he was taking his
Yeah.
anger out or something.
So then you go back to Cinderella with her family, and I'm not sure if this Cinderella has only one stepsister, but there was only two family members. And then you get the fairy godmother starting a trend here because she gives her what appears to be like a Model T car
Yeah,
to go to the ball, also
yeah,
a flapper dress. But the car is a thing that just kept coming up. I would say for most of these, Cinderella is given a car. It's not like a carriage,
yeah,
which I thought was interesting. Most of these went for like a modern take on Cinderella. Even
yeah.
even
You're
when it's something where it's obviously in the olden days, like for most of this, I would just assume that it's not modern times. But the fairy godmother comes in and gives her a car.
Yeah, I know that was something that happened a lot with these shorts, and I always was fine with it because it always made me laugh. It was
Hmm.
just hilarious to me because it was like it makes no sense, but
Yeah.
unless the point of it is just like, and let's make this as relatable to the audience as possible, and then you understand it. But it is funny when you
Yeah.
combine that with like literally like this medieval like tale.
Hmm. For some of these, it is supposed to be like modern times, but for these ones, I think it was just supposed to be kind of a joke. Like, because especially for this one, like I'm not 100% sure I found every single early version of Cinderella, but I'm gonna assume, other than the Lotte Reiniger one, that this was the first. So it is, at least in this instance, a clever twist on the story to give her a car, because that probably had never been done before.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It's probably what the first time that's ever happened.
So then she goes to the ball, and it's apparently love at first sight. And also, the cat and dog are in love. So I guess one of them was supposed to be a girl. That wasn't clear.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah.
Because I was thinking maybe it was the dog, but now that we've thought that maybe this wasn't supposed to be Julius, maybe the cat was the girl. I don't know.
No idea.
And then there was a brief scene that I could not make out what exactly was being said because there was like some text from off screen of someone yelling something. I think that the last word was served. So I think someone was saying something like dinner is served or something. And then like the entire ball just like walked to the door. It was the way that it was animated was hilarious. It was one of those looping things where it's like the same animation happening over and over again. But I thought it was kind of hilarious that they had this scene seemingly calling people for dinner, and then it was just like a mad dash to the door to get to the food.
Yeah, that was funny.
And then another thing that I thought was funny was when Cinderella flees at midnight, her shoe flies off and smashes into the prince's face.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like they really get like really simplistic with the story sometimes. It's like there's no reason for the shoe to fly off or foot, but hey, that's what happens in the story, so it happens.
I think he just was trying to go for a more crazy version of the story because like all the way that people were like crazily running to the food and then her shoe flies off, I think he was just trying to do different things with the story that wouldn't have been seen before.
Yeah, that makes
And like the next scene, I think I know what's going on, but this is like, as far as I know, I didn't see any other version. I don't think this has been restored in any way, so it is hard to tell exactly what's happening sometimes. This scene, I had to like rewind like 4 or 5 times to try and figure out what was going on. I think as she is running home, her old clothes are chasing her down and leap onto her body, and her new clothes leap off and run away. It is really kind of blurry and like the shaky old animation. I couldn't exactly tell, but I think that's what was going on. So I was like, who is chasing her? And why don't they have a head?
sense. Okay, well, you were paying more attention to it than me. I was like barely staying awake during this thing. It was very bland to
Yes, for
me.
some of these, I can't blame you because some of them were very boring.
Yes, but I'm glad you like took the time to like rewind it and actually try to figure it out. Like, bless you for that, because these are hard to understand.
Some of them I feel like I probably put more work in than others because, especially for this one, like it was Disney's, so I felt like I needed to pay a little bit more attention.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
When we get to a few other ones, I didn't bother rewatching any of them. I kind of just
yeah.
made a few notes and it was like, I don't really know what happened, and I don't think I'm going to be able to figure it out, so I'll just keep going.
No, I get it. I get it. I have a special love for like Disney. Like, so like I do like pay more attention to their films sometimes. So I can see if I can sometimes a lot of times just so I can see if I can see any kernel of the like brilliance that Walt would later have in any of his early stuff.
Hmm. But yeah, this one it's pretty short. It ends pretty abruptly with the prince finding Cinderella with her stepfamily, and he gives the shoe to the stepsisters to try on. As, maybe stepsister, maybe stepmother. I don't know. It wasn't ever explained. I don't know if it's one of each or what. He gives it to her. Then he sees Cinderella, and he knows immediately that she's the person from last night. So they kiss, the pets kiss, and that's basically the end.
Yeah. It was serviceable, like for what it was, for the time that it was released. I feel like this is probably like a fine film.
Hmm. And I'm trying to do all of these in the order that they were released, but there was one in here that came out in 1925 that I was not able to find, and I'm going to assume that you never found it since you never said anything.
No, I couldn't find this one. It was like the one made by Walter Lantz.
Yes. Because I found references talking about this short, but like no matter what combination of keywords that I tried typing in, I was never able to find a Walter Lantz Cinderella. So I figured I'd mention it just for completionist's sake, but I couldn't find it. So
I assume that that film is lost and we're not
yeah.
able to. That's what I assume.
Well, for a lot of these, I kind of assumed that they would be lost. I found more than I thought I was going to, actually. The
Yeah.
next one that we're going to talk about apparently was lost for a time. There's a YouTube channel that said something like I saw in a comment on one of the videos talking about they had paid money to get these from like some archive. There's the Mutt and Jeff series, which I didn't even
Hmm.
realize that Mutt and Jeff had an animated series. I knew they were a comic strip back in the day, but I didn't realize that there was animated shorts for these characters.
Oh yeah. I saw some of their animated shorts earlier, like in my life, and like they're not bad actually.
Yeah, and it actually was higher quality than some of the ones that came later. So
Hmm.
I think the person who had this channel, who paid to get these out of an archive, also paid for some kind of a restoration to happen. So somebody cared enough about these to make them presentable.
Oh my
Whereas,
God, I love people who do the film restoration thing. That's one of the most important things to me. Like I have to preserve films.
yeah, but a few that we'll talk about did not get that same kind of treatment.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But this one is called A Kick for Cinderella. And this one is the first one where, as I was watching, I was like, this really is just Cinderella in name only. Like they took the basic idea of Cinderella and then just went their own direction with it. You have the character Jeff. Like I wasn't sure which was which because I've always just thought of Mutt and Jeff as Mutt and Jeff. I didn't give any thought as to which was which. But
Me
I
neither.
guess Jeff is the shorter one. And you open with him reading Cinderella, and Mutt comes in saying that he's going to a Charleston exhibition, and it's for fancy steppers only, so Jeff isn't allowed to come.
Mm,
And whatever
yeah,
this Charleston exhibition is, it's there's a big poster that says featuring Professor Mutt. So I guess he's teaching people how to dance the Charleston.
I guess.
And then you have Jeff like crying by himself by the fire alone, and a huge ball of flames flies out and turns into a beautiful woman, which I'm assuming is supposed to be his fairy godmother. And she
Yeah.
transforms his clothes, gives him magic dancing shoes so that he can outdance anybody. And then this is also silent, so you get a title card telling him to be back at 12 o'clock or you will lose everything. And you will lose everything is in giant quivering text, which cracked me up.
Yeah.
And then you get another, at least from what I could tell first, in that this fairy godmother also gives him a car, but he crashes it through the wall of the house to leave. And I kind of wonder, did this scene influence a future cartoon that we'll talk about later? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's possible.
So then he goes to the dance and everybody loves him, which infuriates Mutt. And he's like trying to stop him. He tosses out a banana peel, ties it into a plant. And then he sees time is running out, so he climbs up a clock to turn back time, which obviously doesn't work, but not because of any logical reason, but because the clock literally fights him off.
Yeah, that was my favorite part. My favorite part was when he was fighting the clock.
And then he, as the fairy godmother warned, loses everything, which includes all the clothes that she gave him. So he ends up in his underwear, and one of the magic shoes kicks him before it leaves, which just gives you the title A Kick for Cinderella.
Yeah.
But then he wakes up in front of the fireplace. Apparently, this was all a dream.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you know what? This one was for again, like for the time that it was released, 1925, like this was actually like one of the better cartoon series. It wasn't it was decent, the gags were decent. Like
Hmm.
the chemistry between like Butt and Jeff, very like Laurel and Hardy type of like duo. And for like pre Mickey Mouse, pre Popeye, they were like kind of like decent like films.
Well, the next one we're going to talk about did not receive the same treatment as the Mutt and Jeff cartoon. This one was
Yeah.
much more degraded. And it took me a while to figure out what this was because where I found it, it was listed as a Waffles the Cat and Dawn Dog cartoon. It's called Cinderella Blues. So I had
Mm.
to like look up some more stuff and figure it out. Apparently, this is part of a series called the Aesop's Fables Theatrical Cartoon Series by the Van Buren Corporation, which I had
Yes.
never heard of before.
Yeah. You never heard of Van Buren?
No,
Yeah.
I guess they were kind of a big deal, but they didn't last very long.
Yeah. That's basically you're basically right about that. They were like kind of a big deal animation studio. Uh, they worked with Paul Terry. I think Paul Terry got his start there before he founded Terry Toons and created Mighty Mouse and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And it actually, yeah, it's like a proving ground for a few animators, but it wasn't one of those studios that lasted long.
yeah. I think that was the thing that surprised me the most when I started looking into it was that Paul Terry was part of it, and he'd go on to found Terry Tunes. So I was like, this wasn't made by one of the studios that I was familiar with, but it had some people who would later go on to do things that I would be a little bit more familiar with.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think the one of Van Buren's biggest claims to fame was that like they were the ones who made the first sound cartoon before Steamboat Willie came out. I'm pretty sure the Farmer Alfalfa short Dinner Time wasn't in the Aesop's Fable series. So if Cinderella Blues is an Aesop's Fable cartoon, I'm pretty sure Van Buren deserves credit for the first sound cartoon.
Okay. But yeah, this Cinderella is played by a cat, which I assumed was Waffles the cat, but I don't know about these characters. There's another cat later who plays the prince, so maybe that's Waffles. I don't know the gender of Waffles. So,
Yeah, no, I know nothing about Waffles or Dawn, so I can't answer that.
and I don't think there was a dog in this short. So I'm not sure why it was listed. Like, obviously, I didn't find it as like the official website of the Van Buren Corporation. So the
Yeah,
the the information that is listed is just something that's been passed down through the years, and it may not be entirely accurate. I don't know, but
yeah,
yeah. Anyways, this one was a very simple story. They basically made up a bunch of stuff with a very
yeah.
light Cinderella motif splashed on top, I
Hmm.
guess. You have Cinderella doing chores, getting yelled at by the stepmother. Fairy godmother appears and asks her if she wants to go to the ball. And I think this is the first, was this the first one that had any dialogue, like audible dialogue? I think it was.
I think it was. Yeah,
But this, you could tell that it was just some guy doing all the voices.
yeah, yeah. That's right. You could easily tell all the boys and the girl.
Yeah. And you have Cinderella saying, "Oh, me? I ain't got a thing to wear."
Yeah. Oh God, it wasn't. He wasn't even trying that voice.
No, no, not really. That did crack me up though with how bad it was.
Yeah, no, me too. It was funny.
And then this is another one where the animation, since it's degraded a bit, I couldn't exactly tell, but it seems like when the fairy godmother shows up and changes her clothes, it looked like the fairy godmother turned into the car. Like she flew into the fireplace and turned into a limousine that drove out of the fireplace and took Cinderella to the ball.
Oh, maybe I missed that.
Like I said, the animation is kind of degrading over time, so it
Yeah,
may not have happened that way, but that's kind of what it looked like to me.
yeah. Oh my gosh. See, this is why I wish the animation was preserved more.
Yeah. And then after this, it seems like there's very little adherence to the story because the prince knows her name. The prince is also dressed like one of the Three Musketeers or something.
Yeah,
And you do get the thing with the time limit, but I don't think the fairy godmother told her a time limit. The clock just came to life and told her she had a minute left. And then she leaves and seemed to purposely step out of the shoe in order to leave it behind. And then she drives away as the clock is striking midnight, and her dress reverts, and the limo turns into an old beater and falls apart. And she tries to run, but then a hook, like an anchor, drops out of the sky and hooks her dress. And I was like, did they steal this gag from Steamboat Willie?
this it feels like they did. I'm gonna assume they did.
But this hook was sent by the prince, who is flying some kind of an airplane helicopter.
Yeah,
Like I said, they made up their own story here. And he reels her
yeah,
in, gives her the shoe back, her dress transforms back, and they kiss, and then he pulls off the helicopter blades and turns it into an umbrella roof. And then the plane keeps flying and takes them to a castle on a cloud.
yeah.
And that's the end.
Happily ever after.
Sure.
Yeah.
A lot of these are just kind of bizarre. Some in better
Yeah,
ways than others.
yeah. Like I do appreciate like the creativity though.
Yeah. And then the next one we have is from Terry Tunes, which I didn't realize that at first. This one I just kind of found while I was searching, and there was no information on this one. I had to like try and figure out from title cards and Googling what this was.
Oh
But this
yeah.
one was from Terry Tunes. And of all of the like goofier ones, this one I felt like was an upgrade. I
Yeah.
I liked the music a lot more. The animation was a lot better. But then at some point I realized there's kind of barely any Cinderella in this at all.
That yeah, I noticed that.
Because it starts with her, but then you go on to the ugly stepsisters who this is weird because they're singing about having no sex appeal, and then you find out later they're basically the mistresses of the king. It's like, where did they get this plot point?
Yeah. This one was one of the most bizarre ones.
It was. I did enjoy a lot of parts of it though, because of how bizarre it was.
Yeah.
And the king and queen reminded me of like prototype versions of the king and queen from Alice in Wonderland, with a
Oh, the
tiny
kind
little
of
king and a hulking, angry queen.
I can see that.
And you've got somebody announcing them, and apparently they rule over New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago,
Yeah.
as,
Yeah.
as well as like a train line. I don't remember exactly what the line was, but it was a train line, and then they yell, "All aboard!"
Yeah, I noticed that. That was really funny. Like when as soon as they said those city names, I was like, okay, this is that. This is one of those type of films.
Yeah. And then the queen says she's on her way to Bermuda.
Yeah.
And then the second she's gone, the king calls the stepsisters. This is where you find out they're basically his mistresses. He tells them they're having a party, and Cinderella wants to go, but there's no fairy godmother in this version. She just falls out a window and falls through a bunch of laundry and ends up with a new outfit.
Yeah, I know. I know very that was very convoluted in a way that, like, the way she got to the ball was very snappy. It was like no need for plot here. Let's just get her there as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And when she does get to the party, the prince greets her and asks where she's been all his life. And then everybody's singing "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow" to the king. And you've got the stepsisters there kissing his cheeks. And suddenly the queen appears. She didn't stay very long in Bermuda.
Yeah,
And she starts chasing the king down with a rolling pin.
yeah,
And then I think the thing that made me laugh the hardest from this was the people fleeing for their lives from the party. There's just a swarm of people exiting the castle to get
I
away
know.
from the angry queen.
Yeah. Oh my God. It was like mom and dad came home and now we have to stop the party. That's what it felt like. It was very funny. Like I wanted to know who like animated this to see if I recognized anybody because I thought the animation quality was good, but like you probably saw this on IMDb. There's like nothing about this
Yeah,
in the credit.
that was the way it was for a lot of these. There was very little information about who did most of these.
Yeah. I mean, I might be able to figure it out if I look at all the people who worked at Terry Toons in 1933. But like, yeah, I have no concrete info though.
Well, yeah, that one basically just ends. The king and queen have a brief duel. She smashes him through the floor, and he's like singing sadly about nobody caring for him, and then that's the end.
Yeah, this one, okay, yeah, this one was. I feel like if I'm gonna be as fair as possible, I feel like this was pretty poorly made. But I
As far as
did,
a version of Cinderella, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I did think the animation was kind of lively and cartoony, and I
Yes.
appreciated that aspect of it. But like story wise, it was really poor.
Yeah. Story-wise, it was very poor. Gag-wise, it made me laugh a lot more than the ones before this one. There were
Yeah,
ones later that were funnier than this one, but because I watched them in order mostly. So this one was where things started getting more entertaining, even though it was really not Cinderella in name only. She was
yeah.
there briefly, and that was it.
I feel like this was around the time in general, 1933. This came out. This is around the time in general when cartoons were like starting to become a little bit funnier and like more consistently. Like the
Yeah.
people who made these cartoons actually know what they're doing and they know what funny is. It seems like we're getting into that era now.
Hmm. Well, the next one we're going to talk about is probably the most famous one. I guess it's debatable depending on how much you're familiar with some of the later ones, but Betty
Yeah,
Boop's Poor Cinderella is probably the only one that I definitely knew before I started this series.
yeah,
Like I wasn't super familiar with it, but like I feel like any animation fan who's watched early animation has seen Betty Boop in Poor Cinderella.
yeah. This is a pretty like famous one.
Yeah. And I didn't really realize this was the only Betty Boop cartoon in full color from Fleischer Studios. I think a different studio might have made some in color later, but Fleischer was the one behind her early works, and this is the only color one they did.
Yeah, you're right about that. He Fleischer wanted to do like go from black and white to color, like, and he was experimenting with this one. And if you, as you can tell by watching this isn't like Technicolor because it isn't like
Hmm.
there's no blue, there's no yellow, it's just red and green basically.
Yeah.
And this was a two color process called Cinecolor. Technicolor was the three strip one that Walt Disney used. Walt Disney never used Cinecolor because he wanted to go full color, which is why he never used the red and green thing that Looney Tunes and Fleischer did.
Hmm.
But yeah, this was called Cinecolor, and Max Fleischer wanted to do more with it, but it was like I think he went back to black and white. It was like the one of the few times he did color, and then he went back to black and white because I think it was just because the color was more expensive.
Probably. And I felt like this one, even beyond the color, they put a lot more budget into the animation. It just felt
Yeah,
higher quality than anything that I'd seen before and even after. Like this is one of the higher quality ones for a while.
yeah, and yeah, it was. This one is more higher quality than the other Betty Boop cartoons, and it's also longer. I think it's like 10 minutes, which is like
Yeah.
not common. There's not a lot of 10-minute cartoon shorts actually.
Hmm. I will say though, I wanted it to be longer. This one I felt like maybe it's just because at this point I'd seen a whole bunch of bad to mediocre ones, but this one was so much better. I was like, I wish they would flesh the story out more.
I know this one was one of the better ones. And Betty Boop is just an appealing character. Like I liked her, so less her alone just made it more watchable.
Hmm. And I think this one is set in the time period that it's generally supposed to be, especially if you're going with the Charles Perrault version, because it seemed like everybody was dressed like, I don't know, 17th century, or maybe it's like 1700s with the powdered wigs, like the French aristocrat people, if you know what I'm talking about, like the giant wig things. I think that's roughly the time period that at least the Perrault version is supposed to be set in. So they were going for a more accurate adaptation than the other ones had been before with all the gags and cars and everything.
Yeah,
Because the fairy godmother actually gives her a carriage, not a car,
a carriage. Yeah,
and has the six mice, two lizards, and a pumpkin to transform into the horse's carriage and drivers.
right. Seems like that Fleischer was actually trying to put effort into like making this like an actual like respectable version. It seems like that's what he was going for with the no modern gags. Make sure it's set a period piece. Make sure it's like it's longer than usual. It's got color. It's like he wanted it to be special.
Hmm. And like the backgrounds too. Like everything looked like they'd put in as much effort and work as they could.
Oh yeah, the backgrounds was elaborate. I liked those like backgrounds. I think it was like a little bit of like a precursor to like the stereo optical like multiplane camera because like if you have ever seen Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor and you look at the backgrounds of that cartoon, it looks like a 3D set. And I don't think they used that in this Betty Boop cartoon, but it was like something similar, like because the backgrounds were like had more depth than usual, so you could sort of see a
Hmm.
precursor to
And they might have been painted too. It wasn't just like drawings, like most of the ones that we've talked about previously were. This was like a full-on production.
yeah. It did look like painting, and that was a lot of Fleischer cartoons were like that. A lot of Fleischer cartoons really beautiful looking, not just the animation, but the backgrounds are really good too.
Yeah. And the animation was a very noticeable step up from a lot of the ones before. I really liked the horses, the way they were animated as they went to the ball, except when the one started to sing. I didn't really like the mouth movements.
Yeah, yeah.
But aside from that, I liked the horses.
Yeah, no, I liked that. Oh, I liked the animation. It was very cool, like the transformation of the carriage from the like. Wasn't there like a scene where the pumpkin was like had a jack o' lantern face and he was singing like that?
Yes, the pumpkin mice
I
and
like,
lizards
yeah,
all sang together.
yeah, I liked that. That was a nice touch.
This wasn't fully devoid of gags, like because like the others were mostly gags. This still had some gags, because like when she gets to the ball, there's like a cupid flying behind the prince, and he sets down his bow and pulls out a giant cartoon mallet to clonk him over the head and send him tumbling down the
Yeah,
stairs to Cinderella.
yeah, there were gags.
And you also had a cameo from Rudy Valley, who I didn't know who it was. I knew this was a famous person, but I had to look it up to see which celebrity it was. But
Yeah,
I think Betty Boop cartoons had done this before, where they have like a famous person do like a cameo in like a
yeah,
caricature version of them. But this was Rudy Valley singing the song at the ball.
Yeah, the thing I just said earlier about how they were trying to make this like a period accurate and they weren't going to do modern gags. I was lying about that apparently because I forgot about that celebrity appearance. That took you out of it.
just
It
just a
was funny
little
though.
bit of anachronism.
Yeah. Yeah. Rudy Valley. I do always appreciate those celebrity cameos. You see those a lot in old cartoons, and
Yeah.
they're always great. They're not like the most sophisticated gags. It's very easy to do celebrity cameos, but I do like them.
I like them just as kind of like a window into the past because like I'm not always familiar with who it's going to be, but it's always interesting to see who the filmmakers thought was a big deal at the time and wanted to put in their short.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons why I like it actually. It's like it is a nice window into like who was popular in those days.
Hmm. And the rest of this is basically just a very short version of what we're familiar with the clock striking and Cinderella fleeing, leaving a shoe behind, and the prince trying to get everybody to try on the shoe. Except they do change it a bit to have him, like, it seems like everybody just starts lining up right there at the party to try it on. And Cinderella lost all of her stuff, like, right outside the castle. So I guess she just never goes home. She just goes back inside in her rags and tries on the shoe, and they decide to get married.
Yeah, I guess so.
This is one of the things where it's only 10 minutes, so you got to shorten
Yeah.
where you can.
Yeah, and they never overthink the stories in these cartoons.
Yeah. The next two shorts were an interesting find. The first one, A Coach for Cinderella. I found this a couple months ago because I was trying to find some like classic Cinderella animation so I could include some clips at the end of a podcast because I was making like an outro for my future Cinderella series on every version ever. And I just wanted to make like a montage of Cinderella clips. So I was looking for some classic Cinderella animation, which is what gave me the idea to do this episode. But I found this short, A Coach for Cinderella, and I was watching it. And I was like, this is interesting. It seemed like a generic, regular Disney-esque cartoon where you got a bunch of little creatures doing an assembly line type thing. I'm thinking of like the funny little bunnies or, those kind of
Yeah,
cartoons where it's just a bunch of little creatures doing something.
yeah, and it's a series of gags.
Yeah. And it kind of was that. It started out with Cinderella and you kind of get the basic story with her being abused, like literally abused. Like it's not shown, but like audible off screen, there's like slaps and punches.
Oh, I was surprised by that. Like you see a lot of violence in old cartoons, but it's usually slapsticky and it's supposed to
Yeah.
be funny. Like I never see like violence that's not supposed to be funny, and you're right, they didn't show it, but it was
Mhm.
like I was surprised by that.
Yeah. You just get the reactions from this little gnome creature that apparently is Cinderella's friend because there's no fairy godmother in this version either. She has some gnome friends who make her dress and make her a coach, which at first I was thinking, is this supposed to be like a mashup of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves along with Cinderella? But it's later stated like I think that they're gnomes, so it's not the same. And they're also very small because the one rides a little grasshopper that looks kind of like a horse,
Yeah,
which is cute.
I was these shorts. Yeah, I got a lot to say about these shorts, but one thing I'll start out saying is is yeah, the gnomes was like being friends with Cinderella was a weird thing because like that's never been in any version of Cinderella before. Her being friends with gnomes,
Uh-huh.
so like that was kind of weird. I at first I was thinking what you thought it was like this was like a Snow White Cinderella mashup maybe, and they even said like even in the shorts the gnomes when the gnome is talking to all the other gnomes in the gnome village he's like saying oh we have to help Cinderella because she helped us and like did they elaborate on that because what how did she help when did Cinderella ever help any gnomes like
I don't, I don't think that they ever explain that.
that was weird, that was kind of weird.
But yeah, the this goes on to become just the series of gags, having this assembly line of them putting together her dress, but also building her a coach, which they then put into a modernizer, and it comes out as a modern for the time car. And then at the end, it has the Chevrolet logo, and I was like, Did I just watch a 10-minute commercial for a Chevy? And
Yeah,
I looked it up. Yes, I did watch a 10-minute commercial for a Chevrolet.
yeah. It was a car commercial, a really elaborate, well
Yes.
animated car commercial, but it was like a car commercial.
Yeah. That was the most shocking find of all of these.
Yeah,
You would never expect Cinderella to be the star of a commercial for cars, let alone like a 10-minute commercial that's basically an animated short that I'm sure was shown in theaters. It's
yeah.
bizarre.
It was bizarre, but like it was weird when I saw this. It was like, oh, like you never get this anymore. When would you ever see this today? Like a 10-minute fully animated like car commercial. That doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
But there was precedent in my mind for this because I have seen, Disney made a lot of stuff like this in the 1940s. Like there was like mostly it was like every once in a while they did something like with a brand, like they made a Mickey Mouse cartoon that was basically a Nabisco commercial, and like I think it came out in like 1939 called Mickey's Surprise Party. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that was like
No, I haven't.
basically a Mickey and Minnie short that advertised Nabisco. And they've done a lot of stuff like this with not with like during World War II, and they made like war propaganda, and sometimes it was like Donald Duck was selling war bonds in like some kind of 3 minute short. And so I've seen stuff like this before. So like I know that they've done animated commercial like this in theaters. But yeah, this was like this was kind of a strange one because it was like it's not like they were using familiar characters. Like there's a character in these cartoons, a coach for Cinderella and the 1937 sequel, A Ride for Cinderella, named Nicky Gnome. That I think he may have appeared in something in shorts earlier than this, but I don't know if he did or not. And I know Max Fleischer directed this, and Fleischer has like obviously he's had success with Betty Boop and Popeye, so I see why they entrusted him with this. But it's yeah, it's a strange kind of thing because it's like it's not they didn't use Popeye to sell the car, which seems like they would what they would have wanted to do. It was like they were just using, hey, let's get Max Fleischer to create this. Let's like do something public domain. Let's get Cinderella to sell the car. That's what it felt like almost.
Hmm. Well, I don't know. Like on Wikipedia, it said that Max Fleischer was the director, but it didn't say that for the sequel. And there was basically no information at all on IMDb. So both of these are, I'm not 100% sure who all worked on them. The only one I know for sure, is someone named Jam Handy, who I don't know if I'd ever heard the name before. He was an Olympic swimmer who got into filmmaking and advertising. So apparently he did a bunch of animated ads like this for Chevy. And it may not have been just for Chevy, but I think those are the ones that are apparently the most famous, probably famous in quotes, because I don't know how famous these are because I had never heard of them. Not that that means everything, but haven't had the lasting appeal of like Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny.
No, no, and yeah, Jam Handy. Yeah, that was like they made a few animated shorts. I don't know how many. I think they might have done like six Chevrolet films total, and like two of them were the Cinderella ones.
Yeah.
But I think the first time I've ever seen Jam Handy's animation like work was the 1948 Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer cartoon directed by Max Fleischer. And that was like something that I didn't know that the people who made that Rudolph cartoon were the same people who made this cartoon as I was watching it, but I had a feeling it was because the animation quality and the directing style reminded me of the Rudolph cartoon, which I don't know if you've ever seen that 1948 Rudolph cartoon, but it reminded me of that, and I was right, and they were both made by Jam Handy.
I don't think I've seen that one. That's another one that I feel like I should watch at some point.
Oh yeah, I think it's on YouTube. You should be able to find that.
But yeah, when I found this one, this is the only one that I had found because I just found a few examples of early animation to use. And then I wrote down the idea to do this episode. And then I didn't start looking seriously for more until a week ago, I suppose. And then I found a sequel, A Ride for Cinderella. I was like,
Yeah.
At first, I was like, did they just do the same thing over again? No, this is apparently supposed to be a direct follow-up, even though to me, they didn't do a very good job with making the characters look like the same as the previous cartoon. They
Yeah.
have similarities. The dress vaguely resembles the one that they made for her, but really the gnome is the only, and his horse is, or horse hopper, as it is called later. But
Yeah.
they're the only ones that really look the same as the previous cartoon.
Yeah, it's not like a sequel, I guess. It's more like a follow-up.
Yeah, because there's stuff that happens in this that is closer to the story of Cinderella that was not established in the first one. Because at the beginning, you have the stepsisters and they know about the rules, like she has to be home by midnight, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do the stepsisters know about all this? That really makes no sense. And also, the gnomes gave her everything and they made them themselves. They shouldn't come with any magical restrictions.
You're thinking about it too much.
Probably. But then you follow the stepsisters as they go to find like an old witch in the forest for some reason. Like this one just goes off the rails real quick. This is barely Cinderella again.
The witch thing was strange. Like again, it feels like, are we doing Snow White again? Like I thought this was
Yeah. I did kind of like this witch though. Her rhymes made me laugh, and her closing of the rhyme was that she even hates herself and then she punches herself in the face.
I
It's
like
like
that was funny. I liked that. That was decent. Decent gag.
but then it took me a while to work out exactly what she was doing. She seems to be conjuring some kind of walrus demons.
Yeah, there was
That's,
walrus views. It was
that's
weird
the only
looking.
way I can describe these things. They're like smoky creatures from her cauldron, but they look like evil walrus things.
Yeah. There was strange character design there, but okay.
But it also did make me laugh because you have this little gnome follow the stepsisters and watching, and he's doing his own little rhyme after the witch's rhyme, and his rhyme ends with, "We love everything." And then one of the walrus demons floats by and he goes, "Step that."
Yeah. That was funny. I like they did it like they did it twice. It was like a
Yeah.
running gag kind of. And so that I appreciated that because that was funny, I thought.
It also helped that the gnome seems to have been voiced by an actual child, and the child had great comedic timing.
Yeah,
His
it
delivery was
did.
perfect.
Like this is like I'm so angry that this is a car ad because
Yeah.
like it's they a commercial, a car commercial doesn't should not be this funny and not this entertaining, but they
Yeah.
made it really funny and entertaining. Like,
Yeah. And then you get this another thing that seems like kind of a staple of cartoons at the time with like this message chain of creatures trying to get a message to Cinderella to get her to go home before midnight. And then at that point I was asking myself, so if Cinderella didn't know that she was supposed to get home by midnight, how did the stepsisters know?
it's like it's, it feel like it's very loosely constructed the story. That's like it's like they don't even care about the logic of it. They just like
Yeah,
everybody knows the story of Cinderella, and that's why the stepsisters know the story of Cinderella. That's what
yeah,
it feels like.
pretty much. But I also wondered in this message chain of little animals, there was a rabbit phone operator, and she looked so familiar. Did they use a design from a different cartoon? I couldn't
You
remember
know
what
what?
it
I
looked like.
that rabbit phone operator with the like with the funny New York accent. She actually did remind me a lot of the rabbits in this isn't a Fleischer cartoon, but it reminded me of the rabbits in the Disney cartoon, The Tortoise and the Hare. That's what she reminded me of. She's like the
Okay.
they were like these. I don't know how much you remember the Tortoise and the Hare cartoon, but there was a scene where the rabbit was running by these schoolgirl bunnies, and he was trying to impress them.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It's been a
Yeah,
long time since I've seen that one, but I do know what you're talking about. That might be why she seemed familiar.
Like that was yeah, it might be that was why she seems familiar to me. So maybe that's where you've seen her too, because she looks like they were literally just aped that character design straight out of Disney.
Okay. But anyways, after she gets this message, she flees the castle, loses her shoe, the prince gives chase, and then you've got the walrus demons messing with her car, but she takes off anyways, and I was like, what what is the point of the what are they doing? I didn't understand what they were doing to her car. And I thought maybe that they had messed with it somehow and she was going to crash. But then as she was driving home, I suddenly remembered, oh yeah, this is a commercial for this car, and that's why the Walrus Demons weren't successful. They were trying to show how great this car is.
Ah, oh, that would explain it.
But then it also cracked me up because when these things aren't able to do anything to her car, the witch tries again and sends this big, like, storm demon. And then the little gnome child thing starts praying to the Lord of all gnomes and horse hoppers.
Yeah.
Which, this is all so bizarre. It just kept cracking me up, and I think it was supposed to be funny, but I found it weirdly hilarious. Just the way that they phrased things. This little child voice praying to the Lord of all gnomes.
It's yeah. Yeah, I mean, Fleischer is always good. I see why these cartoons are funny because I do like Fleischer.
And this storm demon thing isn't able to be any more successful than the walrus demons. It's like pelting the countryside with everything he's got, and nothing is stopping this car. You have the stepsister's carriage getting blasted in half, but Cinderella's just driving calmly with no issues at all. I also did think it was interesting that they chose to depict Cinderella as driving herself, because I feel like in most things of the time, you wouldn't show a woman driving. Like, I know some did, but I don't know how common it was, because even one of my grandmothers never learned how to drive.
You're right.
So I thought it was really interesting that they had Cinderella driving herself. She had a
Yeah.
driver at the end of the last cartoon, but this barely held on to any continuity from that. So in
Yeah.
this one, she's her own driver.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how common it was for like women to like drive their own cars in those days. I'm not like well taught in that area.
Yeah, I feel like obviously some did. My other grandmother was driving until just a couple years ago, and she's in her 90s.
Right.
But the my one grandmother never learned how to drive at all. So
Right. Right.
I don't know. But Cinderella gets home in plenty of time. Literally nothing happens to her. She doesn't change back. Her car doesn't disappear. She's still wearing the dress from the gnomes when the prince gets there the next morning to ask to marry her.
Yeah.
And then as soon as this dialogue started, I knew where this was going. It was so dumb, but it cracked me up by how painfully obvious this was. She turns down the prince because she has no dowry. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, I know what the dowry's going to be. And the prince says he has no need of any dowry except for her. And that coach.
Yeah. Not surprised.
And that was the end.
Yeah, the end. Yeah, agree. Yeah, they did their job. Chevrolet was happy with that, I'm sure. It was funny though. Yeah.
I don't know that that part was supposed to be the funny part, at least for Chevrolet. They probably
Yeah.
were all like shaking hands with each other, like, oh, yeah, it's a great ending. Way to sell our car.
Yeah, I
Meanwhile, I'm just
know.
like, oh, wow, that is really dumb. Like, hilariously dumb.
Yeah, it really is dumb. Yeah, but that's what happens when you like making like commercials. Like you have to like, you're at the mercy of corporations, and that always dumb things down. But oh well.
Yeah, that was the weirdest find of all of these two
That
car
yeah, no,
commercials.
those car commercials were weird. They were weird and like and well made, surprisingly. Like, but yeah, but strange.
Well, from then we can go to this one is from 1938. This one I only found last night, so this is kind of a last minute addition. This one is called The Glass Slipper, and it's also by Terry Toon.
Yeah.
This one is another attempt at modernization.
Yeah.
And I don't know how successful it is. Parts of it did make me laugh because you have Cinderella with like, I think it's supposed to be like a really strong Brooklyn accent,
Yeah.
talking on the phone to her girlfriend Sadie, telling her all about the ball,
Yeah.
eventually boring Sadie to sleep, which made me
Yeah.
laugh.
Yeah. That was a funny touch.
And then you've got the fairy godmother coming in. And as soon as I saw her, I was like, okay, this is supposed to be somebody. I don't know who.
Mhm.
So I had to look her up. She's supposed to be Mae West.
Mae West.
So that was interesting.
She was a common celebrity character in a lot of cartoons, like
Okay,
Disney, Warner Brothers.
that makes sense. Yeah. But then she's talking about the ball and the dancers are dancing the jitterbug. And the prince is apparently supposed to be Harpo Marx.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, it like is this Harpo Marx? Yeah, it was like which was funny. I think if it was supposed to be him, I thought that was hilarious. I feel like whoever had the idea to make a Harpo Marx the prince like deserves a raise because that was a very very good idea for like comedy wise.
Yeah. This whole thing was just filled with goofy subversions because the way it ended too made me laugh because when the prince comes by looking for Cinderella, he's looking for the owner of the slipper, but then the fairy godmother comes in to claim ownership.
Yeah,
So the fairy godmother gets the prince.
that I love that. That I never saw that in any version of Cinderella before, and I thought that
No,
was
me
very
neither.
that was a hilarious subversion of the story. Like, and it because it makes sense. It kind of is the fairy godmother's slipper when you think about it.
Yeah. But yeah, that one was one of the more ridiculous ones. I liked the modern touches, but I think the fact that they were just, it was basically Cinderella telling the story to her friend who basically didn't care at all and fell asleep. That cracked me up the most.
Yeah, that was a funny one. I thought the ending was funny. I thought the Harpo Marx thing was funny. It wasn't. It was like Terry Toons is like not like my favorite animation studio, but especially when you compare them to some better studios. But they do a consistently good job with their gags, and
Yeah,
this one was a good example. They do some funny stuff.
yeah. Well, the next one is also from 1938. This one was a Merry Melodies cartoon directed by Tex Avery. Cinderella meets a fella, which, like, I feel like I know a lot more about Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies than any other one. I had not heard of this one. And the way that, at least the sources that I was finding before I found the cartoon itself, they were talking about this as if Elmer Fudd was the prince. But the character, I didn't realize that this character was Elmer Fudd. It's called Egghead at the time. I guess he must have morphed into Elmer Fudd over the years.
Yes.
But the sources that I was reading was calling this character Elmer Fudd, but to me this wasn't Elmer Fudd.
Yes, yeah, it's kind of a complicated like history, but you basically nailed it. You're right. Egghead kind of morphed into Elmer Fudd, and like so, like I think what happened was like Egghead, the character in this cartoon, Tex Avery created him, and like other directors like Chuck Jones used Egghead, renamed him Elmer. If you see some early Elmer Fudd cartoons, he's dressed the same as this. He's like Elmer Fudd wearing a derby and he's got that green jacket.
Yeah.
And then and then like later that Elmer Fudd character, they put him in a hunter costume, and then he became the Elmer Fudd we all know. So yeah, he like Egghead kind of morphed into Elmer, and that's why they call him Elmer Fudd in this cartoon.
Okay. But yeah, this character, either Egghead or Elmer Fudd, is the prince.
Yeah.
And the story starts out seemingly normal, but then it devolves into a series of gags because you have Cinderella apparently knows that she has a fairy godmother and she knows that she's late. She's expecting her to be there in this version. So she calls the police, who apparently find her in a bar. And the fairy godmother finally comes in, now drunk, and she does a bunch of magical mistakes, including accidentally conjuring Santa's sleigh instead of
Yeah.
a car or a carriage. And eventually she settles on a Wild West stagecoach and says, I guess that'll have to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And then you've got Cinderella and the prince dancing at the ball. And when her time runs out, she runs away, but then she runs back to toss him her slipper,
Yeah. Yeah.
which that cracked me up.
That was funny. That was she ran away and then she literally oh yeah, I forgot to drop my shoe. And she ran back and dropped it. And she ran back away. And that was classic Tex Avery. That was like he was so funny.
Uh-huh. And then the prince goes out to search for her, and he finds her house marked with many neon signs telling him where to go, and then finds out that she's gone to the Warner Brothers picture show. And then she kind of breaks the fourth wall, revealing that she's out in the audience watching now,
Yeah.
and calls him to come out and join her.
Yeah.
And that's where it ends.
Yeah. So yeah, anybody who's familiar with Tex Avery knows that this is like totally this is exactly the kind of film that he would make. It's like always breaking the fourth wall. And everything I love about him is here, basically. Like, but like, this is just sort of like before his comic timing was perfected. Like I feel like it's like a lot of his later films were funnier and
Mm-hmm.
sharper, and his work at Warner Brothers was sort of like where he was like discovering himself and sort of finding his comedic attitude, and
Mm-hmm.
this was sort of in that period. But compared to a lot of other cartoons at the time, this was really like outstandingly funny.
Mm-hmm. Well, for one Tex Avery cartoon, we can move on to another Tex Avery cartoon, Swing Shift Cinderella from 1945.
Mhm.
We're kind of, I don't know if I missed any, but we're kind of jumping, like, there's a lot more years between each cartoon from now till the end, because we go from the 30s straight into 45, and then the next one will be in the 50s, and then after that is the 60s. So it is possible that there are other ones. If anybody's listening and they know of other animated Cinderellas, let me know. But these are the ones that I found.
Well, the ones that we talked about are there was more Cinderella cartoons than I knew existed
Oh
already.
yeah, yeah, me too. I was surprised I found so many. I really thought I'd have like six.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's a lot more than that.
Yeah, I shouldn't be surprised. I guess you know how popular Cinderella is, but like but still, like I didn't realize.
Well, Swing Shift Cinderella is another one where it's almost basically Cinderella in name only, because
Mhm.
Cinderella is not really even the star. It's the big bad wolf and also the fairy godmother.
Yeah, they're kind of the stars. Yeah.
And I haven't seen the others, but I feel like I think I read that this follows a different cartoon with the big bad wolf. So this is kind of not exactly a sequel to that, basically just his character from a different cartoon.
Yeah. This is kind of like there was this other earlier Tex Avery cartoon called Red Hot Riding Hood, and that came out in I think 1943, and that might be the one you're talking about because the character, like Cinderella in Swing Shift and Cinderella, she started out as Red Riding Hood, and it's the same character.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the first. That was her first appearance, and the first appearance of that wolf who's like lusting after her. And this was kind of like not exactly sequel, but like a follow up.
Well, this one also starts with Little Red Riding Hood, but apparently a different than what was in the other cartoon, because this is a little girl. But this Little Red Riding Hood stops the chase and points out that they're in the wrong cartoon. So the wolf shoos her away and decides to go find Cinderella. And he takes a taxi to her house, which it seems like she lives in a hotel, because she basically has this mansion called Cinderella Arms, and I think she just
Yeah,
works there. But also she's dressed in rags, like very
yeah,
skimpy rags.
yeah. It didn't make a ton of sense.
There's also no step family in this version, I don't think.
Yeah, no, there's no. Yeah, I didn't. I never realized that, but yeah, there's no step family.
So this wolf is bothering Cinderella. He won't leave her alone, so she calls her fairy godmother. This fairy godmother is also at a bar. I th I think they took some cues from the previous one.
I think so.
She also seems to have the exact same bag for her magic wand as the previous fairy godmother.
Yeah, not surprised by that.
I did like this one better though. This fairy godmother cracked me up.
Yeah, yeah,
The way that she sips her drink and the way that she goes after the wolf, and then when Cinderella has left, she tries to she's trying to get the wolf to pay attention to her instead of Cinderella, and I'm not sure. I think she has like an old-fashioned swimsuit thing with like a Miss America sash, but it says Miss Repulsive 1898.
Yeah, yeah.
And that
Yeah.
cracked me up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is another one where Cinderella is given a car because when the fairy godmother comes in, she transforms her outfit into like a red evening gown. And I was wondering, is this where they got the inspiration for what Jessica Rabbit wears? Because it looked like the same dress that Jessica Rabbit wears.
I think that Jessica Rabbit was inspired by this character. I think you're right about that.
Yeah, just everything about that outfit, just it was like early Jessica Rabbit.
Oh, and a lot of stuff in Who Framed Roger Rabbit was Tex Avery inspired.
Okay. But yeah, she gives Cinderella a car, which she then crashes through the wall, which is why I wondered if they maybe got some inspiration from that earlier version.
Yeah.
And then she's going after the wolf, trying to get him to stay there with her. And he ends up getting her magic wand, changing her bathtub into a convertible, and racing after Cinderella. And then the fairy godmother, she's following not far behind in her own little car that she'd made out of a pile of garbage.
This very like choppy like Jeep
Yeah.
she made out of yeah, trash can.
And then at one point, after they get to this nightclub where Cinderella is performing, because there's no prince in this, Cinderella must have like three jobs because by the end of this, you find out she's another type of worker.
Yeah, yeah.
So she works at a hotel and she's also a performer in this nightclub. And when they get there, the wolf accidentally kisses the fairy godmother, and that drives her even more crazy. And she starts using this cartoon mallet to incapacitate him so he'll stay.
Yeah.
And then I didn't realize this was supposed to be a parody of something else because Cinderella comes out in this little swimsuit thing and sings "Oh Wolfie."
Yeah.
Apparently, this is a different song called "Oh Johnny" that they have changed for this cartoon.
Oh yeah. I think I forgot about that, but I think that trivia sounds familiar.
But then at some point, Fairy Godmother warns Cinderella that it's almost midnight. So she rushes off, and the wolf tries to follow her, and she tries to use the mallet again, but he ends up using it against her so that he can escape. And Cinderella is racing home in the car as the transformation is wearing off, but she manages to make it home just in time to leave for her other job. It turns out that she's like sort of a Rosie the Riveter type figure.
Yeah.
And that's the reason for the name of the cartoon is that she has the swing shift at a place called Lockweed, which I think is supposed to be a parody of Lockheed.
Yeah.
So then she gets on this bus and she's relieved to be finally away from the wolf. But then you reveal that the bus is actually full of more wolves who start wolf whistling as the cartoon ends.
Yes. Another very classic Tex Avery gag of multiple like wolves appearing at the end of the cartoon.
I don't think I've seen a lot of Tex Avery stuff, especially like the stuff on his own. I think I've seen more of his Looney Tunes work than I've seen of him just on his own.
Oh, you are missing out. His MGM cartoons are so funny. They're just like this, fast-paced, wacky. I love that.
I
Love
did love the pace of this. The wolf, his attitude towards Cinderella got old, but I loved the pace. And then having it be subverted by the fairy godmother there did win me over for this one. I liked her a lot.
Yeah. The fairy godmother is super funny in this. And yeah, like a lot of the comedic timing. Like I said, with the Looney Tunes, I feel like the Looney Tunes, he was a little bit more slow. With MGM, he got really quick. And he said he liked working for MGM more because they allowed him to, they were less creatively constraining. They allowed him to just be as funny as possible with this really fast-paced gag. One of my favorite things about Tex Avery is how fast his cartoons are, as you can see in this.
Yeah. There was times it was just like one thing after the other. This well zooming around. It was really crazy.
And oh my god, the animation of Cinderella's like dance number when she's singing "Oh Wolfie" is super good animation. Like
It
they really,
was.
Yeah, you notice that? Like Preston Blair is the name of the animator who did this, and he's really good at like he worked for like Disney. He worked on Fantasia and Bambi, and then like MGM got him, and he's really good at, as you can see, the like human like figure.
Her movement seemed real. Like I
Yeah,
don't
they
it
really,
didn't seem like a lot of times I can tell if something is rotoscoped. I don't think this was, but it seemed real.
yeah, it did. Yeah,
Like obviously she's a cartoon, but just the way she moved seemed like an actual human.
yeah, that was what the amazing thing because you're right. It wasn't rotoscope, but it seemed like maybe it was like felt like the same thing they did kind of at Disney, which Disney never rotoscoped. They were they used live action reference, and I feel like that's probably what happened here.
Hmm.
I don't know who the live action reference model was for her, but it seems like that's what happened because that's how good the animation looked.
Yeah. Well, then, aside from Betty Boop, we go on to the other famous character in the role of Cinderella in one called Ancient Fishery, which is a Popeye cartoon
Mm.
from 1952, and we finally get a proper gender swapped version. I feel like I'm not counting the Mutt and Jeff one because that was barely Cinderella. This one is
Yeah,
like
yeah,
trying to actually tell the story of Cinderella, but with a princess instead of a prince, and Popeye instead of Cinderella.
yes.
And I liked the way the way they worded the sign of Princess Olive choosing a prince from amongst ye males. I don't know why that just cracked me up.
Yeah. No, that is funny. Yeah.
I feel like there was a lot of like faux old English in this that was funny, but that one cracked me up more than any of the other uses.
Yeah, no, I liked it because that made the dialogue even more funny. That seemed like they were making fun of
Uh-huh.
the dialect
Yeah.
a lot in the dialogue.
But in this version, you have Popeye working apparently at a place called Bluto's Beanery, basically dressed in rags like Cinderella.
Mhm.
And Bluto is leaving for the ball, and Popeye's fairy godfather shows up, which is basically just Popeye again.
Yeah,
And he asks for a spinach can, which he turns into a car for Popeye, and then gives him a prince outfit, and then tells him he's got to be home by midnight or he'll change back to rags. And then at the ball, you have Princess Olive tripping and falling down the stairs, sort of rescued by Bluto. He gets her crown off from around her neck and says he's going to try it on for size. And then you have Cinderfella announced, which is Popeye. And then they start to fight for Olive, and she chooses archery as the contest to win her hand in marriage, I guess.
yeah,
And Bluto tries to rig the game by turning Popeye's arrow into a boomerang, but it flies out the window and hits a bull, getting a real bullseye, according to Princess Olive.
I laughed at that. That was funny.
And then Bluto wants to do it with pistols instead. And I don't know why Popeye agrees to this because Bluto is a proven cheater, but he
Yeah,
does. And not only does Bluto cheat, but he uses a cannon which blasts Popeye all the way through the wall back out to his car unconscious, which is when the clock hits midnight and everything changes back. And since it was changed back to what it normally was, instead of a pumpkin, it was a can of spinach. So
Mhm.
when he wakes up, Olive is basically being sexually harassed by Bluto,
Yep,
if not just straight up assaulted.
yeah,
And she's screaming for help. So he picks up his can of spinach, eats it, and transforms into a knight and rushes back inside to save her. And he punches Bluto out of his own armor, which somehow transforms into a stove, which
yeah,
traps him.
yeah,
And they ride off together to live happily ever after. Except Olive's nose gets trapped in Popeye's helmet, and that's where it
yeah,
ends.
yeah. Yeah, not bad. It wasn't bad. I thought it made me laugh several times.
Yeah. It wasn't quite as crazy and hilarious as a couple of the previous ones, but it was funny.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan in general of the later Popeye cartoons from the 50s, but well, especially compared to like the Fleischer stuff, like because yeah, they're not as funny, but they're still decent. Just famous studios, which is the studio that made the later Popeyes from the 40s and 50s, are lesser quality than other animation studios, which is like a lot of studios outside of Disney, MGM, and Warner Brothers had their work cut out for them in that regard. So
Mhm.
I don't like to be too unfair, like to them if they're not as good as those three great ones. But yeah, they're just not as funny. But they're still like good. Like some of them are funny. Woody Woodpeckers are good sometimes. Like some of the later like Popeyes are good. So yeah, this one was just sort of like a middle tier, but like there was some funny stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, you can tell it's not quite as good or quite as good quality as, well, even just looking back to the previous one with Swing Surf Cinderella,
Yeah,
much higher quality of animation. But this one was still better than a lot of the ones we talked about at the beginning of the podcast.
yeah. There are a lot of like bad like cartoon shorts in these days. So like any if any of them make me laugh, I don't want to like harp too much on the how like bad they are compared to other studios because that's still an accomplishment.
Hmm. The last one we're going to talk about today is a cartoon called Signorella and the Glass Huarache from 1964. This was a Looney Tunes cartoon, and apparently this was the last Looney Tunes cartoon released before Warner Brothers Cartoons shut down, which I did not realize.
Yeah, it shut down in the 60s. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Like Looney Tunes was continued later on with some other studios, but this was the last Warner Brothers cartoon Looney Tunes.
Yes, like Fritz Freeling, like and David H. DePatie, like they could try to continue the Looney Tunes because they all wanted to keep making them, but Warner Brothers didn't want to keep making them. So like I think they continued past that
Yeah.
using the Looney Tunes characters. But yeah, you're right. This is like the actual last Warner Brothers animation, like Looney Tunes cartoon.
Hmm. And when this one started, I kind of thought that it was going to end up being a Speedy Gonzales cartoon because the characters sounded like characters from a Speedy Gonzales cartoon.
Oh yeah,
And I think this is supposed to be in Mexico, but I don't know if this is one of those things where they've confused Spain and Mexico or if they're doing it on purpose because there was a lot of elements that was specific to Spain, but also a lot of it seemed like it was supposed to be Mexico. So I wasn't 100% sure the setting. I'm assuming Mexico, but there was a lot of Spain stuff as well.
oh I don't know. I don't know when it was set.
But yeah, anyways, there's this guy in a bar, I guess. Like you don't see their faces. You see them like in silhouette. And he's telling
Yeah,
another guy about Signorella, who is being mistreated by her strap mother and strap
yeah,
siblings.
yeah.
And I don't know if that's like a specific term or if he's just comedically mispronouncing. I wasn't sure if I wasn't
Yeah,
sure.
me neither.
I've
I don't
never
know.
heard anyone refer to anybody as strap mother. So I didn't know if that was supposed to be a joke or if that was something from another dialect. I don't know.
Nah, I don't know either.
And in this version, her friends are bugs, specifically cucarachas, cockroaches.
Yeah, I could go out.
And as soon as that came up, I was like, well, they're going to be the horses.
Yeah,
I was basically right.
yeah. No, that was obvious.
And he talks about her stepfamily barely feeding her. And you have a scene where they throw her a bone and she chases it down, but it's taken by this tiny little chihuahua
Yeah.
who roars at her. And that probably made me laugh the hardest out of any of these cartoons.
Ugh, that was like so unexpected.
Like I figured it was going to be one of those things where it's like an overly aggressive tiny dog because that is a thing with chihuahuas. Like they try and make
Yeah,
up for their
yeah,
size by their aggression. But the
yes.
way this thing reacted from being meek and tiny and shaking to roaring.
Yeah, the roar. It was the roar threw me off. Like it wasn't a bark or a woof.
No, it just I think that it cracked me up more than anything that I'd watched before this. That was the funniest thing.
Yes.
But in this version, the prince is Don Jose Miguel, and he's throwing a fiesta. And then, of course, you get the fairy godmother showing up and transforming her. But she basically transforms her into a whole new person because she doesn't bear any resemblance to the Signorella who was there before in rags. It looks like a totally different person.
No, no, it doesn't. It's like it's just like the makeup and the hair does wonders, I guess.
Uh-huh. And instead of glass slippers, she has glass horachas, which are a type of sandal.
Yeah.
And then, like I guessed, the cockroaches are transformed, but instead of horses, they're burros, little
Deborah.
donkeys.
Oh, right. Right.
And then, of course, she goes to the fiesta. She dances with the prince. He falls in love, etc., etc. And then she flees at midnight, leaving the glass horace. And you have the prince searching for her, trying it on every girl in the kingdom. And then when he gets to Signorella's house, her evil strap mother ties her up and throws her into a pig pen where it looks like she's going to drown because she's
Yeah.
basically completely covered in mud with just her foot sticking out, which the prince sees out the window and just walks up to this foot sticking out of a mud puddle and puts the sandal on it. And it fits, so he pulls her out. And I was like, so if it hadn't fit, would he have just left her there?
Yeah, that's that's morally questionable.
So then we go back to the guy originally telling the story in the first place, and he's ending the story as if this is a sad ending. And the guy he's telling it to is asking, why is it sad? Sounds like a happy ending to him. But then the guy reveals that he married the strap mother, so it was a sad ending for him. And then the strap mother appears and drags him away.
Yeah. I've seen this cartoon a lot since I was a kid because I watched Looney Tunes a lot, and like I've always thought this ending was was funny.
I don't think I had seen this one. I used to watch a ton of Looney Tunes cartoons, but I don't think they must have. I don't think they played this one on TV when I was watching.
Oh, oh, you just saw this for the first time this year?
Yeah. Yeah, this is the first time I'd
I
watched it.
Yeah, I remember this one from my childhood. And yeah, but I haven't watched it in a long time until now when I was like checking it out for this podcast. And it was like better than I remember actually. It's like really funny. You know, I'm not a huge fan of the 60s Looney Tunes, but there are occasionally some really brilliant ones that stand out in that decade and like this. And I do think the art style is really beautiful too.
Hmm. Well, out of all of these, I have to say my favorite was probably the first one, the Lotte Reiniger
Yeah.
cartoon, because that one was the most artistic.
Hmm.
But like, as far as just like the straight up funniest one, well, aside from the Chihuahua in the last one, because even though that made me laugh the hardest, I don't think the cartoon as a whole was the funniest. It just
Yeah, no.
happened to have the funniest moment.
Yeah. Right.
I kind of feel like the Tex Avery one might have been my favorite, which I wasn't expecting because in just watching scenes of it, I was like, this is gonna get old because this wolf is seems to be like he never actually gets his hands on her, so it doesn't quite escalate to basically sexual harassment, but he's still chasing her all over the place.
Right. And that's like kind of makes the character like appealing.
I feel like normally I would kind of hate a cartoon like this, but I think the fact that they included the fairy godmother kind of redeemed it enough that I ended up enjoying that one the most.
Yeah. Because he was kind of like the wolf's foil, which is something that he needed to make him seem like less threatening, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like most of these, not all of them, but most of them had some aspect of them that I really enjoyed.
Mm.
But as far as an overall enjoying it from beginning to end, I kind of think it might have been the Tex Avery one, which I don't think I was expecting.
Yeah, you know, it's like I'm glad to hear that because that's probably my favorite one too. And like I just think it's just I've always been a fan of Tex Avery's comedy style, and this one is I think like it represents the pinnacle of everything I like about his comedy. So I feel like Swing Shift Cinderella is probably my favorite too. Like I do usually enjoy like the fast paced stuff and the fourth wall breaking stuff and the zany stuff, like that's sort of more cartoony than usual. So that's probably why I favor it. But also, yeah, just like Tex Avery in general is just one of my favorite animation directors. But I do really enjoy the Lotte Reiniger one that you like, and the final one, Cinderella and the Glass Harache.
Yeah.
Those three ones are probably my top three.
Yeah. I like how different they all were too, because a lot of the earlier ones kind of ran together with the quality being kind of on par with each other. All kind of not that great, some better than others. But like
Yeah.
the further along we got, the more different they got and the better they got.
Yeah. I do like how the top three I chose are like ones from the 1920s, one's from the 40s, and one's from the 60s. They're like equally distant by decade
Yeah.
apart. And all, like you said, completely different, but
Yeah.
all well made.
Yeah, I really liked doing this. I'm kind of thinking I might do this for some other fairy tales, but
Yeah.
I got to thinking, like, I know from watching Looney Tunes when I was a kid and other Disney cartoons, there were other fairy tales that were done and redone by different studios. So it would be fun to take some of those lesser known stories, probably some that wouldn't have very many like adaptations as far as like a full-length movie, and just see how the shorts approached them. So we might have to do this again, but choose a different story. Have to see what else is out there and what might have enough versions to do an episode on.
Yeah, you'll probably have a lot of material for that because, animated shorts, they love to like do like reimaginings of like fairy tales and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's probably where we can end this one. But until the next time, do you want to let people know where they can find you if they want more from you?
Yeah, if you want to like continue to listen to me like geek out about animation, I am on Twitter. My handle is at ejunkie2014, and I also go more in depth than a tweet by actually writing actual articles in my blog called the Entertainment Junkie Blog, and you can find me at ejunkie.blog.com.
Okay. Well, until next time. Thanks for listening to Every Version Ever. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My Linktree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.